one of the things that I notice is that people don't prepare in their interviews or in their discussions. But what they don't realize is the other person in the call is evaluating them, is asking those questions.
Hi all, my name is Patricia Tan and I'm the Executive Recruiter for Sales and Marketing, Digital and Technology Industry. Welcome to the next episode of Shift Podcast, where I speak with movers and shakers in the digital and technology industry. Today, I'm really excited to have this special guest. So welcome, Pete Nuchanatanon.
Hi, thank you, Pat, so much.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly? I'm so sorry because I was practicing, Pete, last night, thinking about this big introduction. And I was like, okay, Pat, you got to get the last name right.
It's pretty good.
Okay.
Most people pronounce it wrong.
Okay. What is the worst kind of pronunciation you have heard?
The worst is the pause. When they start, when they attempt it too fast, and then they try to like nucha, and then they just pause, and then struggle throughout the rest. It's
then they nucha this stuff. Okay, Nuchanatanon. So welcome, Pete Nuchanatanon.
Awesome,
great.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you so much, Pete. So for those who don't know, Pete has worked in multiple fields of industries such as FMCG, technology, and currently digital assets firm. So Pete, tell us a bit more. Was all these career path planned out that, you're going to do FMCG first, Procter & Gamble, and then next would be Google? Are all these planned out?
To answer your question, nothing was planned. I think it's more about the evolution that I went through as a marketer, and when the learning curve in each company started to decline, and I started to become extremely comfortable in doing what I was at that particular firm. Right. I always start to think about what's next, and so when I moved from P&G to Google, it was about understanding technology, and it was about trying to figure out how I could play a role in Southeast Asia's adoption of certain technologies.
So on that point, Pete, obviously moving from FMCG, which is selling tangible goods, to the tech industries, how was the journey like?
Well, there's always some kind of connection between the two companies. So when I was at P&G, I was leading marketing for Thailand. Okay. And when I joined Google, I was leading marketing for Thailand. So the similarity were the users. I had some understanding of the users, and I had some understanding of how to engage with those users. The other similarity was that at P&G, I was a buyer of Google's media. And then when I moved to Google, I was the seller of Google's media to companies like P&G or Unilever or other types of firms.
Come full circle.
Yeah. And so once I started to make those connections, it was the shift was easier, and the shift made more sense.
I mean, Pete, well, all these did you intentionally say, okay, the next one would be, because you mentioned about learning growth at a certain level, you said you want to look for something that further challenge. Would you then say tech is the next one I would go, financial services is the next one I go, or just more of opportunity knock on your door?
I think it was more about what I wanted to learn. So at P&G, your marketers are very far away from product development, and so you never really have a chance to work on technology. You never really have a chance to work with product or researchers to actually develop anything. And so when I joined Google, it was a chance to get exposure to tech, the faster pace in tech, what the technology can enable, and get closer to the product development side of things. But at Google, it's still a very global company, and you're still 3,000 miles away from most of the product leaders.
Of course.
And so then when I joined Grab, I got intrigued at Google around how product gets developed and how you can localize it and get results.
Yeah, right.
And so that that naturally made me more curious and naturally allowed for that transition over to.
I want to dive a little bit deeper about the similarity and differences coming from FMCG to tech to financial services. What were the similarities and what were the differences?
I think the marketing principles are still quite similar. The user groups are still quite similar. If you take Singaporean users, for example, everyone in Singapore washes their hair. Everyone in Singapore, showers with various different bath products. All parents in Singapore, go through the journey with nappies and so on.
Right.
But all of those people still use, streaming services. They still use financial services. They still need a car or a taxi or any of those types of things.
Right.
The differences lie, though, in our ability to go deeper within the journey of a user, because in FMCG there's not enough data sets for you to become specific. You don't know. Well, let's take shampoo, for example. I spent many years trying to grow the shampoo business. And if you take the journey from somebody who's sitting at home on their living room couch to walking into the store to buy a shampoo, you don't know any of those data sets. You don't know when they leave their home. You don't know what they're thinking about, what information they're searching about. You don't know how many times they've gone into a store to actually look for their shampoo but walked out because they couldn't find it. But if you take that same journey on a tech product, let's say an app, you know if somebody has downloaded. You know if somebody has set up their account. You know if somebody's gone through KYC. You know if somebody's put in their payment method. You know what type of payment method they've put in. You know if somebody's watched their first series on Netflix but stopped watching after that. You know if somebody...
You could capture all the behaviors.
That's right. And because you have all of those data sets, product marketing or growth or marketing in general in tech tends to be a lot more data-driven and detailed.
Right.
And because
was that a steep learning curve for you during the transition? Because when you move from FMCG, in this case P&G, to Google, all of a sudden you have all these data sets. Was that a learning curve or a steep one, or it was?
Well, in some aspects, it made the job easier, because when you have the data, you're more confident about the decisions that you make. I guess the challenges were, whether I knew what data to look for, and whether I knew what stages in that user journey I should focus more time on.
So the FMCG and tech, somehow there was that similarity, like you say, the behavior, just that the data sets was a bit different or in a much larger amount. But how about going to a digital financial services? In this case, Grab Financial Services.
Even more so. Financial services have even more data. Because generally they're platforms, and so if you take payments, for example, every single type of transaction that user makes, and so it's not just the data about your own product, but it's also where they choose to use that data. But when I moved over to Grab Financial, I think the thing that intrigued me the most, or the thing that I realized hasn't really happened yet within the financial service space, is actually innovation, which is quite interesting. So a lot of banks and a lot of fintech firms have digitized their services. But really what that means is that they've taken a form which you used to physically fill out,
digital form,
and it becomes a digital form. But it's still the same thing. It's still the same pieces of information.
That's right. Yeah.
They're in the physical world, you used to have 5 different credit cards. Today in the fintech world or in the financial services world, you still have 5 credit cards.
Nothing has changed.
Nothing has really changed except for
the
onboarding, the digital onboarding flows that have changed. And so I think what Grab sort of provided was the ability then to start thinking about, well, how do you change behavior? Can you have one card but customize all the benefits versus having 5 different cards? having one insurance policy, but can you customize that as your life changes versus applying for new policies every single time? It's really the same thing.
Do you think that is a trend, or there is like a playbook to say FMCG going to tech and then a bank versus a tech going to a bank? I think a lot of people tend to ask me, Patricia, I've been in FMCG for so many years. I want to go to a bank. Can I do that? So my question is always, when would bank take the FMCG and outside industry candidates from the different industries? Is it from when they were a lot more junior, or is it when they are 10 years, 20?
I think it's slightly different. But early in my career, I focused, or people tend to focus a lot more on execution, being able to get things done and get results.
Okay.
It's can you get a million downloads?
Yeah.
And so if you are making that switch earlier on in your career, it's really about, can you make the connection between the two industries from an execution perspective?
From an execution standpoint.
Right.
Okay.
A little bit later in the career, you're managing teams. You're managing teams of 10, 20, 30 people. You're managing you're managing multiple types of specialties, whether it's creative or insights or strategic, type teams. So a little bit later in your career, it's not so much about executing, but it's about, can you build that team that can get results? And it's and so if you're switching earlier in your career, making that connection is I think a bit easier.
Okay.
But I think a little bit later in your career, it's still very, very possible. But you just need to be able to find a firm that is looking for somebody that can take them on the next journey. And there are similarities between those two. I can give you an example.
Please do.
Most firms, I would say, in Web3 are looking for people that have Web3 experience. Most.
Yes.
In Crypto.com, for example, and there was also a recent blog from the owner of Binance, CZ, around the fact that you don't need cryptocurrency experience or Web3 experience, because they're looking to get the next generation of users onto the platform. And so they're looking for people that have the experience of new user acquisition, or being able to convert from maybe the financial service industry over to cryptocurrencies.
Right.
And so if you're in a traditional bank, for example, and you have that experience, maybe it's actually quite easy for you to join a Web3 or a cryptocurrency firm because of that. So later in your career, it's about making the connection with what the mission of that new company is looking for.
Right. Let's talk about the new user acquisition and as well as the product development. Maybe I can touch more about product development first, Pete, because you mentioned earlier the product development skill sets are important. And I often find interviewers' feedback to me is your marketing candidates have lack of product management, product development experience. That's something that I find it difficult to comprehend or difficult to help the candidates, because candidates will say, Patricia, I'm part of the product team. Are you able to share a bit more? What kind of experience that the marketing person should gain?
First, marketing has been split up in I think in tech.
Okay.
So if you remember whether back in school anyways, they used to teach you marketing has 4 P's or 7 P's, right?
Price, promotion, place, and product.
But in tech, a lot of that's actually been split out. So product now designs the onboarding flow and what the product looks and feels like.
Okay.
Product is a separate team to marketing, and so marketing doesn't have that that overview anymore.
Right.
Price is usually something that's determined by the business teams. And the growth teams tend to think about user acquisition and digital marketing, etc., digital media and marketing.
Right.
And so marketing has actually been split out into these like various different specialties.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't mean that there's not a role for marketing. It just means that these new 4 or 5 different specialties are going deeper than they've ever gone before.
Okay.
So when I think when a firm says, this person doesn't have product experience, it's
Yes.
probably because they don't have experience in working with product teams, going into that level of detail and being able to share information that can help improve the way a product is built or how a product is changed.
And which industry would have given such exposure that the opportunity to work with the products team to go to the level of details? Would you say technology?
Maybe a different question is, how can you get experience in a tech firm without having to work directly with product, so that you can build your knowledge and experience in tech, and then maybe at a later stage start to get more exposure with product, because it's not something that you can do instantly.
Right.
If you remember my transition from P&G to Google,
Yes.
Probably 50 or 60% of my role was on the B2B side, selling advertisements to other top firms. 50% was on the consumer side, but it wasn't so much about working with product. It was more about promoting the products that we had. I think it's also a mindset shift. If back in the day, 20 years ago, product was a part of marketing, then, back then maybe marketing was was dictating how product was determined, change the packaging, do this, XYZ. But today it's a lot more of a collaborative process. So it's not about dictating how product should be. Please build this with these 5 flows. It's more about sharing what are the user insights or the moments that matter most for a user.
Because back in the days, Pete, having been in the sales and marketing recruitment for more than 17 years, I remember when financial services used to hire product manager for credit cards. We always look for candidates from the FMCG. FMCG has been the biggest hunting ground for most industries. That's why a lot of financial services came to me many years ago to say we only want FMCG people coming in to build our credit cards. But those was many, many, many years ago. These days, clients will come to me, Patricia, we want candidates from the tech industry when I'm looking for a marketing person. But a lot of hiring manager may not necessarily know why I'm looking for the person from tech industry. Because they're like, because everyone is hiring from tech industry, let's hire from them. But the truth is, like what you mentioned, is the exposure in the product development again and the user acquisition that allows them to now coming to an organization where they can continue to drive that. Because I think FMCG now being perceived as a more traditional industry these days, therefore candidates who has been in FMCG for more than 10 years wouldn't be a preferred choice. Yeah.
I'm not sure whether there would be a preferred choice or not.
Yeah.
But I think in your example just now, people or my experience in FMCG has always been that marketers in FMCG are quite holistic in their thinking. And so they're very detailed and they're holistic and they're business driven. So when you put them onto a credit card business, they'll think about, well, is it 1% cash back or 2 or 3%? What other benefits could we add to make that, that card more attractive for users?
Yeah.
Then they'll also think about what the barriers are. But what I find is a lot of times the question is never, how can I improve the experience?
Right.
It's just, what can I add or take away from the existing product or the existing credit card to be able to make it more attractive and sell more. And once you start to, hire people from the tech world,
they more design.
They think about design as well. Sure, you can do 2% cashback, which is the most attractive in the market. But what about if we could solve other issues? For example, when a user gets a credit card, it takes a week or 2 for it to come to the house. You have to call and activate it and so on. With GrabPay, with Revolut, with a lot of these fintech firms, you get a digital card in your app straight away. So you can make that first payment instantly.
Right.
And you wait a week to get your physical card, but it doesn't stop you from transacting right away. But if someone hasn't had the experience in tech and understands what can be done, usually it's just about tweaking the benefits as opposed to revolutionizing that particular product.
Yeah, because there's that much that we can revolutionize and all.
Right.
Just looking at you talking about financial services, talking about tech, talking about hair care products, like, how did you do it? I mean, I think the audience will really love to hear any advice or any strategy when it comes to transferring industries?
It's not something that I would say is easy to do.
Okay. You make it easy. Make it look easy.
It probably sounds easy because I've been in those industries. I haven't talked about healthcare or other industries I haven't had a chance to work in. But I think it's about drawing parallels. Everyone, uses beauty products and healthcare products. Pretty much everyone has some kind of banking solution, etc. I think one thing that marketers do well is understand user insights. One of the things that I notice is that people don't prepare in their interviews or in their discussions. And everyone thinks that an interview is about them and a chance for them to showcase their resume. But what they don't realize is the other person in the call is evaluating them, is asking those questions. Does this person have experience in tech?
So it's all about problem solving at the end of the day. And you mentioned, maybe take a step back, like just now you mentioned about user insights. I think that's a really good tip, Pete. I think despite transferring from FMCG to tech or financial services and now digital assets place, it's all about the user. The user are the same. Let's talk about interview prep. You are right, absolutely right, Pete. In my line of work, I could see the difference between someone never done the industry but did a lot of prep work versus someone who came from the industry and didn't do the prep work. Very often the former will leave a better impression. So your advice to someone that coming from a different industry is interview prep. But to what extent, what kind of prep work? It's about researching the company, researching the competitors. To what extent, what kind of prep work you have done?
So I think the first thing that I always sort of think about is, well, in that particular firm or that particular industry that I might be talking to, how is marketing structured? I might have done digital marketing at P&G, but today it's called growth in this particular company. And so I shouldn't be talking to them about digital marketing. I should be talking to them about how I led digital growth efforts within my previous world. Back in the day, I used to do, packaging design, but today it's more about product design. And so then how can I use those same philosophy or the same thinking based on packaging, on shampoo, but now maybe thinking about the different design principles.
So it's drawing the relevance, picking the right words, picking the right choice of the function, like what you say, because you can't say package design. If you go financial services, they will be like, what is that? But it's a product design and showcasing that you are applying the same marketing concepts, but in a different industry.
Of course. I mean, the interviewer is going to still see through it, but at least they understand that you have some thinking.
Drawing that
could be relevant.
But what about, I think a lot of candidates always ask me this question, Pete, like, Patricia, how do I get in tech industry? Tech industry seems to be having a very high barrier of entry for marketing candidates that has never done tech before. Any tips or any strategy for them, because a lot of them never done growth. And these days, tech companies call it growth marketing, which obviously they have not done growth marketing, which is user acquisition coming from a traditional. But if they have the interest to go to tech industry, what can they do?
I think, draw parallels and prep for those interviews. One of my previous bosses, told me that when you're changing a role or thinking about changing a company, there's something has to give. You can stay in the same company but change functions. You could change company but stay in the same function, or you could keep the same company, keep the same function but change locations. But you can't do all three at the same time because it'll be a shock to you. Change companies, change location, and change function.
That's a very good one, Pete. On that point, I'm going to speak to two questions then. Does that mean in order to survive or rather to have a much longer runway in this digital age, the marketing skill set should now be more horizontal instead of focusing on just one silo of marketing? Like what does the marketing talent need to have these days to have a much longer runway? Is it important to have the horizontal skills in marketing, say product marketing, brand growth, or become just an expert in just growth?
I think expertise is more important now.
Okay.
Because the marketing functions are being broken down into 3 or 4 or 5 different specialties.
Right.
Having expertise within those specialties is going to be important.
Mm.
But that doesn't mean that you have to be in one function the entire time. It could just be that you need to be in one function for a few years before moving to a second marketing specialty. And then together, that gives you a bit more of a holistic experience. But doing everything at once now wouldn't allow you to succeed because it's so detailed. The only type of maybe level that could succeed in is maybe sort of a C level. So if you're going into a firm as a chief marketing officer or as a CEO, sure, you can hire the right specialist to take care of those things.
What about the Southeast Asia or overseas experience, Pete? Obviously, you have worked overseas and you work in Singapore. Do you think that gives you the competitive edge?
I think having exposure to multiple countries does, because the more senior you go, you tend to look after a larger remit.
Right.
And usually that means multiple countries, or at least teams in multiple countries. I don't think you need to work in every country. You don't need to work in 15 different countries, but I think having experience in those particular countries helps.
So would that be any different from doing a regional role in Singapore? Or you reckon that experience working in those markets physically will make a difference?
It depends on how detailed you are.
Yeah.
If you're doing a regional role, because there's a lack of local roles, and you're able to get into the details, you're able to figure out user insights, you're able to benchmark versus the best players in those companies and make recommendations on how you should improve or customize your products. I think that's a very good skill set to have. But if you are a regional head that has very big local teams that do everything, and you're there more for management as opposed to execution understanding,
right,
then I don't think it helps in the today world.
A lot of traditional marketeers are finding it really difficult to enter the tech industries, especially in the last 2 years when tech industry was at its peak. This traditional marketeer very often receive the feedback that their lack of growth marketing and lack of product marketing. These are the 2 key feedback that we are hearing from the talent pool that are finding it really difficult to enter, to get the jobs these days out there. What would be your tips and advice for them?
I think the best is to upskill.
Upskill.
And maybe just a couple of ideas, but I'm sure there's more.
Sure.
Move within the existing company that you're in to maybe more of a growth or more of a product marketing or more of a specialty versus what you're doing today. Can you become an advisor for a bunch of startups where if you've got 7 or 10 startups under your belt, and you can speak to those challenges that the founders have had, can you participate in accelerator programs and startup competitions and university programs to get experience around the challenges that maybe those startups have, could be one. And that's, why don't you build that function? If you are looking for more of growth experience and you're leading brand or IMC, why don't you build that growth mindset? Showcase how brand can lead to downloads and acquisition and adoption. Right. If you're leading digital marketing, you can build the growth function within your capabilities.
That's really good advice, Pete.
There was these 2 examples that I learned when I was at Google. There was a team at Nivea. They used to look after sunblock, sunscreen. And they came up with this insight around once the weather hits a certain degree, people are looking for sunblock. So if it's more than 30 degrees or 32 degrees, there's a spike in searches for sunblock. And once the weather is, colder, people are not searching. So why don't they turn on their advertising when the weather hits 32 degrees to be able to drive more sales to the store versus when the weather is colder? That is growth thinking. But it's in a very traditional FMCG world.
Industry,
and there's another example from McDonald's where McDonald's, especially in Singapore, during peak hours, is packed. The lineup in front of, the drive-through and the lineup in stores is full during peak hours. So McDonald's sort of came up with the idea of why don't they switch off their ads during peak hour? Because they don't want to promote more people coming in. They want to promote people to come in during the times when there's no people.
Okay.
That's growth thinking.
But this is awesome, Pete, because not only you're touching upon growth function, you are actually indirectly touching upon growth mindset. And I think that is critical for any marketers out there. Pete, I think I love the idea about working with startups. I think that is the best way and the fastest way for you to learn the startup world, the e-commerce world, the growth marketing, how marketing is done in the tech world, despite you being in a very traditional industry. That's awesome. I'm going to ask you one, because obviously the next 5 to 10 years, everyone is getting a bit nervous to like, what's going to happen? What kind of jobs is going to be available?
Nobody knows. I think in the next 5 years, there's going to be more fragmentation of marketing. Marketers don't have to be tech. And there are many, many industries out there that people can do well in, that are going to exist in 20 years from now. Countries are going to continue to grow and do strong. Because the last I heard, the CEO of P&G and Unilever and telcos around the world and pharmaceutical companies are all doing well. And those industries are growing, and the stock market the stock shares are increasing. And so if tech is not right for you, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think that there's going to be a couple of functions within firms and tech firms specifically that are going to be stronger. So there's definitely going to be more of a design team.
Okay.
Design/brand team, and those two things don't need to be separate.
Okay.
There's, growth teams are going to become extremely strong. And I think that there's going to be a stronger product team that takes care of more than what they take care of today.
Okay.
And so, maybe even product marketing merges with product overall. And I think marketing is going to be a mindset that exists within all the functions as opposed to a function by itself.
And marketing is also a commercial, driving commercial, driving the business versus back in the days when marketing is just a support function. Right. Yeah. I would love to have more chat with you. But to bring this chat to a wonderful close, I'm just going to ask, what are your views about the digital assets these days?
I think my views are the same for tech. Well, the tech industry today is leading the downturn when it comes to the stock market crash, with digital assets being ahead of the curve. You've got the NASDAQ down 35-40%. You've got some firms within the NASDAQ that are down 75-80%.
Correct.
And you've got digital assets which are sort of leading that forefront, and they're sort of down 75% as well.
Yeah.
So I think what's going to happen over the next 6 to 18 months is that valuations are going to come down and they're going to be more right-sized versus maybe some of the traditional assets. Your PE ratios will come down to be a little bit more conservative, versus the 100, 200x.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be more within the 20, 25x sort of range.
More reasonable.
More reasonable.
Realistic. Yeah, agree.
I think that within digital currencies, neo-banking, and maybe within fintech, what's going to happen over the next 5 years is there's going to be more consolidation. Okay. Not everyone is going to last. I think that business models are going to change. Not everything can be free. And I think that some industries are going to pivot quite drastically, especially when it comes to things that are more traditional.
Right, right. No, thanks, Pete. It's really wonderful session. Learning so much insights. Appreciate that, and hope everyone enjoyed the wonderful insights from Pete's session today.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
If our content resonates with you, please leave a comment, like, and subscribe to our channels on all platforms this podcast is on. The Shift Podcast is a digital platform that features all digital leaders on a variety of digital issues. We want to share inspiring experiences of great leaders in the industry, as well as the journeys they took to get there, in the hopes of inspiring a new generation of leaders. Thank you.